Hello friends! With the Procreate 5.4 update, there are now even more incredible default brushes to choose from, and we're going to explore some of them. In this video, I'm going to try the Sanderling brush. To find this brush, we're going to head to the brush library, open up the pens set, and about halfway down the list, you'll see Sanderling. As usual, I haven't made any changes in the brush studio. I'll be using the brush exactly as it was installed. And I'm working on a canvas that's set to 3000 pixels square at 300 dpi. The first thing we'll do is take a look at the brush behaviors, and we're going to start with a stroke test at 3 different sizes, starting with a small stroke, a medium size, then a large stroke. Now the smallest size really is quite small. It gets down to an extremely fine point. Hopefully you can even see that on camera. Not much to see at the medium size. It's a really nice smooth stroke, and pretty much the same at the largest size as well. Although you do start to see a little bit of feathering on the edges, but nothing too noticeable. The brush does have a taper and it is pressure sensitive. You can see an obvious shift in size when more pressure is applied. So I'm guessing this is meant to mimic more like a brush pen versus a fine liner or a ballpoint pen, which wouldn't usually have any size variation. I expect this brush to be fully opaque. I'm just going to put down a couple overlapping color swatches to test. And yes, it is 100% opaque. There's absolutely no colors showing through where the colors overlap. Well, nothing really happens when you tilt the pencil and use a much looser grip. The only thing I can see here is a much smaller and maybe even more inconsistent stroke compared to if I were to use a regular grip with the brush at the same size. Now, this isn't really the kind of brush that I'd think to blend with, but I'm going to long press on the smudge tool so that it switches to Sanderling, and let's see what that does. So if I just blend vertically between the two colors, not much happening. There's not really that much of a blend there. Now you can kind of push one color into the other. It creates kind of a smudge with a gradient to it, but I can't really see myself using this smudge tool in this brush for much. If you'd like to use the same process for testing your brushes, I made a brush testing worksheet for you. There's a link in the description for the free download. Okay, let's draw something here. I'm not even sure if you can see this properly on camera, but I'm starting out with a very light, very rough sketch just to figure out the basic shapes and where I want to place things. I'm taking advantage of that really fine point to make the skeleton sketch as light as possible. Now I can increase the brush size and use those basic shapes as a guide for the placement and size of the flowers. I'm drawing each of these flowers on a separate layer so that I can easily erase the overlapping areas. And of course, it also makes it easier to move things around. Onto the smaller flowers, buds, and stems. Although I'm making more decisive strokes here, I'm still using a sketchy approach and keeping things nice and loose. Since this brush has a taper and is pressure sensitive, I can shift and adjust how firmly I press to help create some nice variation in each stroke. I'm pretty happy with the layout, and I think I'm going to make this piece monochromatic. So I'm going to use several different shades of green. So the first thing I'll do is change the background color to a nice light green. Now, I don't plan to fill any of these shapes with solid color. I'm going to use more of a line work approach. For these big flowers, I'll fill each petal with slightly curved lines to give the impression of some volume. It's subtle, but I'm shifting the pressure with each of these lines, starting off with a feather-light touch and then increasing the pressure slightly toward the end of the line. It's kind of a tedious process, but I think the result will be worth it in the end. Now I can increase the brush size to add the stamen in the center. And again, I'm adjusting how much pressure I use so these little specks are different sizes and shapes. I also want to beef up some of these shapes, make them feel more substantial. So I'm using a larger brush size to make some of these lines thicker and add some additional detail. I'll beef up some of these lines on the petals too. All right, I want to add a little shading in some areas, so I've dropped my brush size all the way down to 1%, and I'm going to do some hatching. I'm keeping the brush size super small because I want this to be subtle. I don't want it to be too heavy-handed, but this might take a while. All right, I'm just going to lengthen my strokes on this side and do a little cross hatching. See how it's getting a little blotchy in some areas? Not sure how I feel about that. I guess it could be helping it look more realistic if some pens are prone to bleeding like that. I'm not really sure. I am noticing that it is a little trickier to keep my strokes consistent when the brush is at this really small size. It might be because of the pressure sensitivity. Any slight shift in pressure is probably just more noticeable at this size. Anyway, I'll probably be here for a while. I'll skip forward a bit so you don't have to sit here with me for the next 12 hours. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Only took about 45 minutes, maybe an hour. I kind of lost count. Now I'm using much larger lines, not quite hatching, but I'm doing this to add some value on the leaves. I'm lifting my pencil up ever so slightly at the end of each stroke to get that nice taper so that the lines aren't blunt at the ends. Almost there. I just want to liven things up with a brighter green, so I'm just going to add a few strokes in this color here and there. All right, I want to add one final touch. I think it would look really nice to add a very light wash in the background, just in a few areas. I'm going to do this in white, and I need a different brush. I'm going to head over to the inks set, and I'll give Agrarian a try. I'm just going to add a light wash of that white in a few spots to brighten things up. I actually really like how that looks. I'm going to do the same with some of the leaves as well, but I'll use a shade of green this time. Let's see, I'll go with one that's slightly darker than the background. So it's just going to be a really subtle shift in tone, nothing too drastic. All right, there's the final piece. So what do I think of this brush? I thought it performed quite well. It could be a really good workhorse for inking small or very detailed drawings. It gives nice, smooth, clean lines, and that taper is really nice, especially if you draw a lot of organic shapes. I did have a little trouble with it getting a bit blotchy at really small sizes, but it was very reliable and easy to use at the medium and larger sizes. I don't do a lot of pen or line work drawings like this very often, but Sanderling might become a go-to whenever I decide to do this kind of work. Do you think you'll ever use this brush? Let me know in the comments. If you'd like to see more from this brush review series, there's a link to the playlist in the description. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd love if you'd give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.